Hello, this is Michael again with Interstate PR here in my home. And I am very blessed today to have a good friend of mine and my family. And he is actually a professor of theology at St. Mary's College and was in Rome when COVID-19 broke out and the country of Italy shut down. Father David Gentry. I'm going to bring him in here and we're going to have a little conversation. Father Dave, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing all right. No
Well,
complaints.
welcome. And you're well, and everybody with you is well?
I'm very well. Yes.
Wonderful.
I'm living in a convent of the Sisters of the Good Shepherd, which is a very interesting religious order founded in the 17th century by a man by the name of John Eudes. And then this branch of the order was founded in the 19th century by a woman named Mary Euphrasia Pelletier. Both of these were people from France. And so this order has always specialized in basically rescuing people who were down and out, who were in a lot of trouble. And they focus a lot on women and children, but basically they help anybody. And so through the 19th and 20th centuries, they were running these refugee centers, basically what we would call today refugee centers. In the States, they run some schools, especially schools for troubled youth, residential facilities where young women or men come and live under supervision. Sometimes they've been remanded there by the court system. So that's the work they're doing in the States. There are about 4,000 of these nuns all over the world. They've grown all over the globe. And in this house, this is their central administration. And in this house, there are about 20 sisters living here. Actually, there are more, but some of them were stranded in various places when COVID-19 hit. So they haven't been able to return home. But these are the sisters who come from all over the world to govern their order from its international center. And so I'm living with, well, there's actually only one other American with me now. Out of 20 people, there are 2 Americans. I'm living with people from South Korea, from India, from Sri Lanka, from Angola, from Burkina Faso, Mozambique, Albania, Jordan, Portugal, just Colombia, all over the world. So it's a very, very interesting experience.
So you're currently on sabbatical, correct?
Yes.
And
yes.
you were in Europe.
Yes.
And then the COVID-19 broke out.
Yes.
Kind of explain what happened. And maybe you can explain what happened and what the feeling was there and how you ended up at the convent and what life has been like since.
Sure. Well, I brought students over here with one of our Christian brothers, Brother Chris Patino, on January the 12th, I think is when we left California. We came over here to do a 1-month intensive immersion course called Walking in the Footsteps of the Early Christians. And that's something we've done every year for the last 10 or 12 years. So that class ended on Wednesday, February the 5th, and all of those students went home. Normally I would go home with them. But because I had this sabbatical, my plan was to stay here in Europe, travel a little bit around Italy, maybe venture into France or Spain or Greece or Turkey, just depending on how my money held out. I was going to do a 3-week study program in Jerusalem at a place called the Center for Biblical Formation, which is run by a religious order there called the Sisters of Notre Dame of Zion. I was also going to spend a week at the Ecumenical Monastery of Taizé in France. So those were the original plans. So the kids went back to the States and I started the sabbatical. I moved out to Castel Gandolfo, which is a beautiful, beautiful town, about 40 minutes by train from Rome. It's where the Pope has his summer residence. And it's just a beautiful little town. It's also the site of the Vatican Observatory, where a lot of the scientific work that the Vatican collaborates in takes place there. And so I moved out there into a guest house run by an Italian religious order called the Salesians. The Salesian sisters run this guest house. So in the winter, it operates on a at minimal capacity. So they had one building where they were actively conducting retreats, and groups from parishes were coming in. Then there's the convent, and then there was the youth, the building that they use for youth and summer camps, which is completely vacant. So I was going to be living there, sleeping there 2 or 3 nights a week, and then traveling. I went to Venice the weekend that Venice was shut down. It happened to be the weekend of Carnival, right before Lent. And I wasn't going there for the Carnival. That didn't interest me, but it was just a convenient weekend for me to go. So I was staying up there. In Italy, there are lots of convents and monasteries, that don't have enough religious to occupy all the space. So they've turned these spaces into what you would call a bed and breakfast, facilities for pilgrims and other guests. So I was staying at a facility there, and I got there on a Friday evening, and Saturday the place was just a mob scene. There were so many people there, and I was kind of regretting having come that weekend because it wasn't a very peaceful experience. But I got to see St. Mark's Cathedral, which is very, very historic. Beautiful, beautiful structure with beautiful art, all done in mosaics. And I got to attend some masses there and attend sung vespers there and all of that, which was great. Then on Sunday, I went out in the morning, and it was like a ghost town. Everybody was gone. And so I started asking around, and they said, well, the authorities have shut down the carnival because there's some sort of a virus that is making people ill. And there were 2 or 3 people diagnosed with that virus in Venice. So they shut the whole thing down. So Sunday was just a very quiet day with no one around. And it was actually a nice day for me in a way, because I was able to walk around and enjoy the city. Most of the tourists had left, and all of the raucous behavior and all that was gone. So I spent the day on Sunday there, and people weren't panicking. I mean, the restaurants were still open and grocery stores, and people weren't wearing masks or anything like that yet. There wasn't a sense of panic just yet. And then the next day I was going on to Ravenna, which is about an hour and a half south of there. And that's also a much smaller town, but a beautiful town where there are magnificent 5th century mosaics in the churches. And I wanted to see those. I've heard about them all my life, so I wanted to see them. So I went down there, and they didn't have a convent or monastery guest house, so I just stayed in a modestly priced hotel. And I asked for directions. How do I get to these places? And they informed me, well, we're sorry, sir, but all of the churches have been closed because we have no cases in Ravenna and we don't want any. And so everything has been closed as a proactive measure so that people aren't congregating in one space. So I didn't get to see any of them, but I'd already prepaid for the hotel and it was non-refundable. So I just stayed and enjoyed my room and walked around the city and had a couple of nice meals. I got back to Castel Gandolfo, and things were fine there. Nobody was talking about the virus at all. And it seemed the areas that the government was clamping down or locking down were all in the north. And it was thought that the virus was contained in the north. And people in Rome were behaving normally. Nothing was closed. Schools were still operating. Colleges and universities were all in session. Restaurants were open. Shops were open. Everything was fine. So I took another little trip. I went to the Amalfi Coast, which is in the south of Italy. Very, very naturally beautiful place. It has to be one of the most beautiful places on earth. So beautiful. So I went down there. Again, no evidence of the virus, no evidence of any precautions. Perfectly normal. I was there for like 2 days, and then I came back to Castel Gandolfo, and everything had changed. Now, in the chapel, the sisters were all sitting in separate pews, far apart from each other. The priest, the Italian priest, was not coming in to say Mass. They drafted me to say Mass for them in Italian. My Italian is not great, but I was able to muddle through. And even in the dining room, we were all one person per table. You know, there were like there are like 5 sisters living there, and then I was the only guest. But we were all eating at separate tables. So it started to feel like, okay, this is serious. Something is not good. And from then on, the virus just began to take off. So I have a friend here whose name is Sister Ellen Kelly. A couple of years ago, I accompanied Sister Ellen and a bunch of her sisters, Good Shepherd sisters, to the Holy Land. I was their chaplain for a pilgrimage. So I was planning to see Ellen while I was here, just to have lunch or something, you know. And she called me up and she said, I think you should come and stay with us, because probably the restrictions are going to become worse and you're not going to be able to move around at all. You're going to be stuck in that building by yourself, you know, with these very nice Italian sisters, but, you know, you're not going to be able to do much. You're going to be locked down there. And she said, if you come over here, there are 20 of us living here. You'd be able to say Mass, celebrate the Eucharist with us. We have novices here. You could teach some classes to the novices. We have pre-novices here. You could tutor them in English, because all of the programs that they normally are participating in were all suspended, because the novices were going out every day and taking classes, you know, in different venues. Well, no one can travel. So Sister Ellen and another sister, Sister Monique, who is from Syria, they drove out and picked me up because they didn't want me getting on a train. The trains were still running, but they did not want me getting on public transportation. So they picked me up and brought me back over here to this wonderful place. It's a huge, huge building, probably built in the 1960s, but a very extensive building, and with lots of room. And this is the international hub of their order. They also run a nonprofit foundation out of this building. So they have a lot of lay employees, none of whom are here now. They're all working from home. So they're probably only half the number of people who would usually be working in this building on a daily basis.
And what around what date was that, Father?
That was exactly a month ago, last Thursday. So I've been here for a month. What date was that? I don't have a calendar in front of me.
That would have been the 9th
Yeah.
April?
Yeah, it was, no, 9th of
March that you
March.
got there.
Yeah. It was a month ago, last Thursday, that I was here. And
So you've been living there for a month.
yeah,
How is it that you guys are getting food and supplies?
everything is delivered. Now, I'm not sure that would happen for the typical Italian family. I don't think it would. But because there are so many of us here, there's a company that delivers all of the raw ingredients for our meals, and the staples, you know, kitchen staples, like flour and sugar and all that. All of that is delivered. There is a skeleton crew of people working in the kitchen, and sort of essential personnel, people who are needed for the kitchen and for laundry and housekeeping. Those people have moved in with us. They're living here so that they don't have to travel back and forth to home. Almost everyone in Rome uses public transportation. They don't drive. Not that many people drive cars. A lot of people have cars, but those are used for the weekend. to go see your family or to do major shopping trips or whatever. Most people, because gasoline is so expensive in Italy and in Europe, most people use public transportation. So the workers have moved in with the sisters. They're living here with us so that they're not putting anyone at risk. They're not at risk of getting the infection by traveling on buses or trains or whatever, and or interacting with people on the outside. And they're also protecting the people who live here. So they're living here.
So,
And,
just in
yes.
perspective, for those who don't know Rome very well or have never been, how
Yeah.
far are you away from, say, Vatican City, where you're at
Yeah.
right
Yeah. I am on the outskirts of historic Rome. So it would be about, I would walk about 20 minutes to a metro stop. Then I could get on a metro stop called Cornelia, and I could be at the Vatican in 10 minutes. So it's probably about a 30-minute trip from here.
So relatively close.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yes.
so, I mean, you're in Rome. We've just ended the Lenten season. We're now going into the Easter season. There's a worldwide pandemic going on. People are struggling with many different things in their lives right now. How, as a priest, just as a person, how has your faith helped you during this time and helped the sisters uh, during this time to strengthen your faith? And what tips might you have for people who might be struggling at this point about their faith?
Yeah. Well, I have to say, Michael, I've been very, very blessed because living with these women, and these are holy women, believe me, they pray a lot. And living with these beautiful holy women has been a great source of strength for me. It has strengthened my faith just being with these beautiful holy women and being able to pray with them every day. So we come together 3 times a day to pray, and we pray morning prayer and evening prayer, and we have mass, and we have Eucharistic adoration every afternoon for an hour. So I would have to say that I really have to say, relatively easy for me because God has taken such good care of me, putting me in this beautiful place where all of my needs are met. I mean, I don't go out, no one comes in without strict necessity, but everything I need is here. I have these people who love and appreciate me. I have a prayer life. I mean, last week we were able to celebrate all of the Triduum liturgies. As a matter of fact, we celebrated them twice because I presided once for the sisters in this building and once for the sisters in the novitiate building, which is a separate building. And they don't mix the 2 buildings. The novices stay in that building for the most part. So my personal faith has not been greatly tested. But I think for people who are on the outside and who don't have what I have, I can imagine that it's much more difficult, especially people who have been laid off, people who are worried about being able to pay their rent or their house note or put food on the table. I think for those folks, it's much more challenging than it is for me. I have it pretty easy, really. I think those folks and people who are losing loved ones, and who have people very ill in the hospitals and so forth, it has to be a great trial. I think really, one friend of mine said to me that she felt as if the whole world was being invited to live the Paschal mystery all at once together, which has never happened before, and at least not in recent history, where everything has to stop. And it's all as if we're all monks and nuns living in monasteries, or living with small groups of people. And our ordinary daily routines have all been disrupted. We can't do the stuff that we would normally do. I mean, some of us are able to work from home, but for most of us, most people, their lives have been have been dramatically disrupted. And this friend of mine, her name is Marianne, she's also a Catholic nun. She was saying it feels like we're all being invited to live the Paschal mystery, the mystery of death and resurrection, that we're all being invited to do that at the same time. So I have a lot of friends who are, devout Catholics they've been watching services on television, it's been really interesting to be here in Rome and to be able to tune in and watch stuff live. Like the Holy Father had a Stations of the Cross last Friday night in St. Peter's Square. And there were 12 people who were carrying the cross around the square. And he was seated at one, out just at that platform right outside St. Peter's that has some cover in case of rain. It was just him, one assistant, and then these 12 people with torches and a cross, who were carrying the cross. The meditations were very, very moving. I don't know if you saw that or heard about it, but the meditations were all written either by inmates or workers, staff at a prison in Padua, the city of St. Anthony of Padua. The meditations were all written by folks who were either inmates or staff or some people who were victims of crime, who were talking about what it was like to try and forgive people who had done harm to them or to their families. So the meditations were really quite moving. And so we went all through all 14 stations in the dark, basically. It started at 9 p.m. But it was really interesting to experience it in real time, that I wasn't watching something that happened at another time, but that I was right here in Rome, looking at this, at a video of this event as it was transpiring.
It's amazing.
Yeah,
right?
go ahead.
Go ahead. It's amazing how technology has made it so that we can still celebrate. I mean, it's amazing, right? It's 1:30 in the afternoon here in California. It is 10:30 in the evening in Rome, and we are able to communicate together and to live stream so that people can hear your witness and your experience of what's going on during this time. And I wanted to follow up on what you're saying, that it's only, this situation has only helped strengthen your faith. But what about the people? Maybe some spiritual guidance for those people who they've been laid off. They've lost their job. They're worried how not only going to pay the next bill, but how they're going to pay for the food for a meal tonight or tomorrow. What are some of your suggestions to those people about how they can dig into their faith and trust in God that things are going to get better?
Yeah. Well, I would say that those of us who are Christians and those of us who have the means need to do everything we can to help those people who are right on the edge so that their faith can be strengthened by our witness. I think when, of course, obviously faith is a wonderful gift and we all need it. But I think that when you're sending your children to bed hungry at night, and you're doing that, night after night, one is in the position of someone like Job in the Bible, railing against heaven and asking, why is this happening to me? I mean, Job never lost his faith, right? And that's why he's considered a righteous man. But his faith was sorely tested, severely tested. And so I think it's very easy for me, it's almost like armchair religion, I'm very comfortable here. My personal faith is not being tested at this moment. It has been rewarded by the love of these women who have brought me into their home and who are so good to me. But I think if I was in the position of one of those people who is really on the edge, I can understand how hard it would be for them. And I think it's just really incumbent on those of us who are Christian, who do have faith, that now is a time when our faith needs to be translated into action. And we need to try to do everything we can to make sure that people aren't going to bed hungry. I read a story, or one of the sisters told me a story about a woman in India who, the sister is from India, and this woman, it's a terrible story. This woman drowned her 3 children because she didn't have any food for them. And this was 3 or 4 days. I mean, that's horrible, horrible. But I can't judge her, because if I was in her situation, what would I have done? Listening to those children cry night after night. So I think it's a time when we really, as Catholic Christians, we have to step up to the plate and do what we can to help people who are in those circumstances, and pray for them, of course, and let them know by our solidarity that we understand what they're going through and that we want to be in solidarity with them.
That's, I think those are really good pieces of advice. I know, and as you know, Crystal and I and our kids have a
Yeah.
very strong faith, and
Yes.
um, we we make a sacrifice every month to send our kids to Catholic school, and I'm very proud
Mm.
to have done that, and continue to be proud to do that. They haven't missed a
Yeah.
week of school, unlike public school children who've had to wait several weeks to get stuff. I mean, the
Yeah.
Catholic schools here in the Diocese of Sacramento have been amazing, and on top of
Yeah.
keeping the education moving, the teachers have been
Right.
just phenomenal. But
Mm.
with that said, I agree with you that it's hard for a lot of people right now, and
Yeah.
we, we do okay for ourselves. But the one thing that we really try to do is we try to, whenever we can, it's a lot easier for me to stay at home than go out to dinner and spend
Mhm.
40, 50, $60 it's going to take
Mm.
for dinner and give it
Right.
to somebody else who needs it. Um,
Right.
and it could be the follow-up on you're saying, it could be when you're going to the grocery store, you can buy bags of food for people, right?
Mhm.
There are
Mhm.
many organizations, St. Vincent de Paul, Catholic
Yeah.
Charities, all these people help, all these organizations help
Right.
people in need.
Right.
Uh, you know, Members of the Knights of Columbus. One of
Yeah.
this how the why the Knights of Columbus started.
Yeah.
Father forgive me with seeing that men were dying and that their families needed help afterwards. He started the
Right.
Knights of Columbus to
Right.
start the insurance program, right? But the
Right.
Knights of Columbus now will help families out of knights to get things done so that they're not left hanging in the
Right.
lurch. We talk about these things, and there's so many things that we can do as humans, as Christians, as Catholics, for
Mhm.
our fellow brothers and sisters. Um, and I want to be cognizant of your time because it is 10:30 at night there.
Okay.
What have you been hearing there in Rome and in Italy about if they're going to be opening the country back up anytime soon? Um, any of your future plans on your sabbatical? Are you guys hearing anything? I know they've
Yeah.
talked about how the spread is slowing, but
Mhm.
the slow of the spread doesn't mean that we're past
Mhm.
the problems, right? What are you
Right.
hearing from the news there in Europe and in Rome and in
Right.
Italy, where I mean, Italy was the epicenter of the world at one point.
Right. Right.
Although I would think, I think many people may agree with me on this, that China never really gave us their full numbers.
Right.
With 18.5% of the world's population and only 5% of the people, that
Yeah.
that doesn't seem quite right. But
Right.
that's a total different story for a different time, right?
Right.
What are you hearing
Right.
there in Italy, and what are they telling you guys about when life might start getting a little bit normal again,
Yeah.
and what that might look like?
Yeah. So let me just, if I can, just say a couple of things about your last remarks about faith. I think, Saint Teresa of Avila said, "Here on earth, God has no hands but our hands, and God has no feet but our feet." So I think when we minister to people who are in need, I'm not saying all those people are necessarily going to become devout people of faith, but that will do more to help them renew their faith or rediscover faith or discover faith for the first time. When people are in dire circumstances and they see that someone recognizes the presence of God in them and reaches out to them to acknowledge their dignity and their worth as human beings made in God's image and likeness. I mean, I think that's where our faith translated into action. Actually, it isn't just about giving food to people who need food, right? It actually is enabling those people with God's grace. It's enabling them to find faith for themselves or to strengthen a faith maybe that has grown weak because of the hardships of life. So I think it's really important that we do those things, not out of a sort of a secular, social justice mentality, but out of our conviction that every human being on this planet is made in God's image and likeness and deserves dignity and respect. The founders of these sisters had a saying, because they were dealing with women who had been drawn into prostitution and stuff like that. They were sometimes dealing with women who were not very lovable, at a certain level. Sin and all of the hardships of life had warped their personalities in certain ways, made them hard. And Mother Mary Euphrasia had a saying. She said, "One soul is worth more to God than the whole world." And I think that's a really beautiful idea. That Jesus, you can often read commentators say that Jesus, even if only one person had needed his sacrifice on the cross, Jesus would have died just for that one person. So I think it's just important to keep in mind the infinite worth of a human soul in the eyes of God. And when we reach out to other people, we may be helping them with a meal, but we're also helping them to find faith. I really think that's important. But now, to answer your other question.
I totally agree with you, Father.
Yeah. So on to your other question. So they're telling us, week by week, what's going to happen. At one point, it was going to be April the 3rd that restrictions would be lifted. But based on what they were able to see from the rates of deaths and new infections and all that, they've extended it to May the 3rd. So here's what's happening. They think that Italy has reached the peak of infection, and the numbers are starting to come down, but they're coming down very, very slowly. And so every day there are still something like 4,000 or 5,000 people newly diagnosed. Now, the problem with that number is you don't know. Maybe they've been positive for 2 months, but just asymptomatic, and they've only just now been tested. It doesn't mean that these are new infections, that the rate of infection is increasing. It just means that they've been newly documented to have the infection. Because, the stats are that a lot of people will be asymptomatic, others will have mild or moderate symptoms, and only a smaller percentage will actually become seriously ill or critically ill. So now they've set it at May the 3rd, which just means that on or about May the 3rd, we're going to get another missive from the government, telling us what the status is. Restrictions could be lifted or modified then, or they could be extended. We really don't know what's going to happen. But one interesting item I can share with you, I found this very interesting, and it hasn't been widely reported. People have been asking, why did this virus take off the way it did in Italy? Well, here's something interesting that one of the sisters read and shared with me. In the north of Italy, there's a city called Trieste, and it's to the north and east of Venice. It's probably the the farthest most point that you could go and still be in Italy, okay? And there was a bid for a new highway to connect Trieste to Milano, which is a big business and financial center. And that bid was awarded to a Chinese construction firm. And those workers came over here in the fall to start this project. Then they all went home for Chinese New Year and then came back. They went home for their holiday. So probably they brought that infection back with them from China. So that's why it took off in the north the way that it did. And I think there are at least two reasons why it wreaked so much disaster in Italy. One is that Italy really values its elderly population. People live to be quite old here, and they may live alone or they live in extended families, but families are very close here in Italy. That has survived all of the encroachment of secularism and everything else. That sense of family cohesion has survived. So Italy has one of the oldest populations in Europe in terms of median age. So all of those people were vulnerable. Also, Italians are very affectionate. They meet on the street, and even just people who are casual acquaintances, receive a kiss on each cheek. And so there's a lot of physical contact, which is a part of Italian culture and has been for hundreds of years. So that's probably another reason that inadvertently helped to foment the spread of this virus. So I think you're right. I mean, I don't want to certainly beat up on Chinese people by any means, but a number of the sisters who've worked in China have said you have to be very careful about trusting what comes out from official government organs, because they're always trying to put the best face on everything.
Absolutely. And it's understandable, right? People want themselves and their country and where they're from to be perceived as being very good at something, right? So,
yeah, but in this case, I would have to say, I mean, it's understandable, but in this case, it's harmful to the rest of the planet, because if we had honest information coming out of there, it would help other countries to make better decisions about their own predicament. So,
and it may help our medical professionals
yeah,
around the world figure out really what's going on, how it's spreading. I read today here in California that they're going to start tracking cell phones, and if your cell phone gets closer to another cell phone that you aren't normally nearby, it's going to alert you that you're too close to somebody.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Right.
I think the other thing, not to be overly political about stuff, but the other thing is the fact that 95% of our drugs and medical supplies are being made in China. That has to change, because you're putting yourself in a situation of potentially being held politically hostage, to a foreign government. So that has to change.
It's a very interesting world that we now live in. I think the timing of this and how it spread was really interesting too. It really spread during the Lenten season.
Yeah.
I've been helping our parish with live streaming masses.
Yeah.
Using this program we're using today. I sit at my home on Sunday and during Holy Week, and I produce the mass from my computer, changing camera angles, putting stuff on the screen. And we have a formula to figure out how many people are watching the mass. And our parish is small. It holds maybe 250, 300 people. And we usually get, I would say 2/3 full. And we're noticing that mass on Sunday is getting what would be a full church.
Yeah.
And we're replaying the mass again later in the day. And we're getting something that's close to a full church again. We're seeing more people coming back.
Sorry.
No, it's quite all right.
The thing about a crisis like this, I mean, we would never want to wish this on anybody. And I don't think that God causes it. God does not cause evil. But we know that God can work with evil to bring about a greater good. That's what our faith teaches us, you know. You look at all the stories in the Bible, the story of Joseph in the Jewish Bible in Genesis, and how his brothers hated him and they were going to kill him or, you know, leave him at the bottom of a well. And finally they sell him to the Ishmaelites who take him down into Egypt, and he's sold into slavery and all of that. Well, none of their actions is defensible. You know, they were sinning against their brother, no question about it. But God used all of that and brought something good out of it. You know, when Joseph finally reveals himself to his brothers, he basically, I'm paraphrasing, but he basically says, you shouldn't blame yourselves. This was all part of a bigger plan. God was the one who brought me down into Egypt. This was all for a greater good. He's able to see that greater good, which came about because of their sin, because of their sin. You know, it's that line in the Exultet, which says, "O happy fault, O necessary sin of Adam." So God can use even human sinfulness, and God's power is greater than human sinfulness, and God can bring good out of it. So I think if anything good comes out of this, I mean, it's a terrible price that many people are paying, but having to give up your daily routine and have all this time on our hands, you know, it's time to think, time to reflect, time to pray. I think it may bring about, for some people anyway, a spiritual renewal and a spiritual renaissance, which would be a good thing. I mean, it's regrettable that it has to come at such a cost for so many people, but that may be one of the good things that comes out of it.
I agree with you fully, Father. I know we've been on for about 45 minutes or so, and it's getting late in the evening there in Italy. So I wanted to, first of all, I really want to thank you for taking the time out today and coming on and sharing your experience with me and those who have been watching. And I want to say as well, thank you for everything that you've done. As you know, you've been a spiritual advisor to me and to Crystal and to my family.
My privilege.
We always appreciate that. We're glad to hear that you're doing well there in Italy. We're looking forward to have you back home here in California and breaking bread together again very, very soon. And
I look forward to seeing you too.
I then again really appreciate you coming on today, and looking forward to talking to you again really soon. For those of you who've been tuning in and watching, thank you so much. If you are just checking it out now, you can actually go back to the beginning of this video and watch it and learn about Father Dave's experience of being in Italy and in Rome when this all broke out. So thank you all very much. We are actually going to have some more of these coming up very, very soon. I've got a friend of mine who is a certified project manager who's going to come in and talk about how you can be better organized at home during the day and make yourself comfortable working at home and that work-life balance now that it all is kind of meshed into one. So thank you all again very, very much.